Hi everyone, my name's Trusty Alyssa from Key Club International, and I'm super excited to introduce our guest speaker today. Christine Shepard is the director for TNC's Ocean and Coasts program. Christine's primary research focuses on assessing coastal hazards risks, quantifying the role coastal habitats play in reducing risk, and identifying where ecosystem-based approaches such as conservation or restoration are likely to be effective for risk reduction. In addition, Christine works to develop innovative spatial analysis and community engagement tools to help decision makers address coastal risks from climate change and coastal hazards like storms and sea level rises. She co-authored the 2012 World Risk Report in partnership with the United Nations and was a member of the Department of Interior Strategic Science Working Group Operational Group Sandy, deployed to assist the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. Please welcome Dr. Shepard.
Anybody? All right, great. Thank you so much. Um, so as my introduction stated, I'm Chris Shepard, and I'm the Director of Science for TNC's Oceans and Coasts program. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you today about why nature is our superpower on today, Earth Day 2026. So before we get started, I am going to share with you a quick story that kind of takes it all the way back to what my teenage children call the late 1900s when I was in middle school. And I completed a science project where I tested whether plants, rocks, or just bare soil prevents erosion best. And I took a lot of time to work on my board, so I actually made it into the paper for my science project. And please forgive my 90s bangs and gold hoop earrings, but the intention of this project was to really try and understand which of these methods would lead to the least amount of erosion. So I had these trays that you can see on the bottom of this photo, and I poured water down the trays, and then I measured along the bottom of each tray how much soil came down into the cup, and I measured that. And what I found was plants win. And at the time, um, I didn't really realize it, but this was my first introduction to what we call now nature-based solutions and the realization that nature can solve real problems. So, a theme of my talk today is curiosity, and to stay curious because staying curious can lead to a lot of things and a lot of impacts in your own community and across the world. So, today we're going to be talking about nature-based solutions and some of my experiences in nature-based solutions work and what you can do to help support nature-based solutions in your own community. So before we get started, I want you to imagine when we're thinking about impacts from climate change like storms and flooding and increased heat, what protects you from that? When you first really think about it, for a lot of people, what comes to mind is something like a wall or a machine or some sort of technology. And a seawall is very common throughout the world as an approach for protecting us from these impacts, just like what you see on the image here along this coastal community. But ultimately, what we have shown, and many partners around the world, is that nature is actually one of our most powerful tools to protect us. And so all of the nature types and habitat types that you see on this slide here provide a protective benefit to people. So they help reduce risk to us, to our homes, to our businesses, to our infrastructure. And I'm going to share with you a little bit today about some of the places that I'm familiar with, or science that I've worked on, or projects related to nature-based solutions that really focus on building up these types of habitats because they're so important for protecting people from the impacts of climate change. So the first example that I want to share with you is from my home state of Florida. And this is a project that features salt marshes, seagrasses, and oyster reefs. This project is called Project Green Shores, and it was kind of an early days living shoreline project. So it was one of the first projects in the United States to really say, hey, we're going to maximize nature here to help protect this area. So this project was initially, the first phase of it was built in 2003 in Pensacola, Florida. And it's been so successful that there's been multiple phases that have been installed and expanded along this area over the past 20 years. And this living shoreline, what it does is you can kind of see the rocky outcrops out in the water. Those are breakwaters that were built to recruit and grow oyster reefs. And so those breakwaters help reduce the wave energy, kind of calm down the wave energy so that the salt marsh and the seagrass that you see here can really get established. And what it does is it holds together the shoreline along this area while it provides benefits for fish and wildlife. And this project has stood the test of time because it's been hit by multiple storms, multiple hurricanes, and it's protected a road. There are homes adjacent to this project and a critical infrastructure adjacent to this project. And there's big benefits for fish and wildlife here. They've seen 5 times the number of bird species in this area than they did prior to the project being installed. So this is really an important project because it's successful, it's benefiting people in nature, and it's survived and thrived through multiple storms. The second type of coastal habitat that I want to share with you is coral reefs. And so coral reefs are found all over the world. Also, we have a barrier reef in South Florida. And coral reefs, they exist completely below the water. However, they provide a big risk reduction benefit to communities that are adjacent to these coral reefs. And this is kind of a more recent observation that's been verified and validated through science. I was a part of a paper that the data on this graphic on the right comes from, where we looked at wave energy outside of coral reefs, and then as the waves come across the coral reefs and what wave energy is actually hitting the coastal communities. And we found that coral reefs are reducing it by a lot, 97% on average. So it's so important for us to protect and maintain and restore these coral reefs for the benefits that they're providing. And many of you might already be familiar with the fact that coral reefs are very vulnerable to climate change by themselves. And so it's important to help them survive and sustain through the impacts of climate change, but even more so because if they're healthy for the fish that depend on them and the species that depend on them, they're going to provide this additional benefit to us from the increasing impacts that we're seeing from climate change on land and coastal communities. The next habitat that I'd like to share a little bit about is mangroves. These are near and dear to my heart. You can kind of think of them as salty trees along the shoreline. And mangroves provide a very clear risk reduction benefit because of the structure of the mangroves right along the shoreline. They reduce the wind energy and the wave energy that's coming in with storms and hitting the coastline and ultimately impacting the people who live there. And I was a co-author on a study that we just recently published in 2025, where we worked with the insurance industry to really understand the damages that came from Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Irma, which impacted Florida in 2022. And we did a study to kind of say a scenario, imagine a scenario in which we didn't have the mangroves there, what kind of damage would we see? And ultimately, we found that mangroves provide a benefit to most communities, depending on kind of like where you are located to the actual mangroves. But if you're behind them and you have the mangroves between your home and the ocean during a storm like this, we found on average that there was a $4 billion reduction in damage. So for those of us that just kind of care about nature, that's great. We know they have value. But for people that are making decisions about mangroves and wanting to care about them for economic reasons, 4 billion with a B is a big number and it gets a lot of attention. So now we're going to move from the kind of more coastal areas into the more inland habitats and really thinking about forests. So forests also are a big part of nature-based solutions on Earth because forests help stabilize sediments and reduce erosion. They kind of hold that soil together. They also provide a cooling effect with the shade that they provide. And forests store a lot of carbon, which we're going to get to that in just a moment. Also, floodplains are critically important for nature-based solutions. So floodplains are found in coastal communities and in more inland communities. And you just think about these are the areas where the floodwaters kind of naturally go. Floodplains help absorb water from rivers when they overflow during flooding events. They're more like a sponge, if you think about a sponge absorbing and storing the floodwaters, and they really provide a damage reduction benefit to our homes and our businesses and our schools. So the way that we keep them providing this benefit is by not developing all of them and keeping them healthy by keeping them free of garbage and things that kind of reduce their ability to provide that benefit. So floodplains all across America, all across the world are very important as a nature-based solution for reducing risk. And last but not least, the nature-based solution that many of us are most familiar with in our daily lives are those that are in our own cities and urban spaces. So green spaces and parks within your own communities and even trees, they all provide a nature-based solution for climate change impacts. So any green space that happens to be in a flooding area or in a floodplain in your own city, it can provide that kind of sponge and water absorption and floodwater benefit. And the trees that we have, or in some cases need in urban spaces, they provide a shading and a heat reduction benefit as temperatures are rising. And that's going to be even more important as we move forward, thinking about how we can use trees to reduce heat in some of our more urban areas. So why does this matter? Why are we here today talking to you all about nature-based solutions on Earth Day? Well, as you probably know, we're seeing stronger storms, more flooding, hotter temperatures. All of the impacts are increasing. And as I have just kind of shown a little bit about how nature and nature-based solutions can help us adapt to those rising and increasing problems, it's also important that we remember that those impacts are driven by the carbon that's building up in our atmosphere, and those same habitats also help remove the carbon. So they're helping us by reducing our risk from things that are already happening and impacts that are already kind of baked into the system. But the more that we can use the nature, it'll help us remove that carbon from the atmosphere moving forward. So there's a double benefit there that's really important. So we have a choice. We can rely only on built solutions. So there's more gray engineered, kind of thinking more seawalls approach, or we can choose to work with nature around the world. And the movement towards nature-based solutions is having an impact and is being successful. And I'm very proud to be a part of that at the Nature Conservancy. One example of a program in which we are impacting our communities through nature-based solutions is a program called Gulf Corps. And Gulf Corps is a large-scale conservation and workforce development program led by the Nature Conservancy in partnership with NOAA. And Gulf Corps supports multiple conservation corps with crew members that work across all 5 states. And the young people that are part of the conservation corps get training in all different types of restoration and nature-based solutions approaches. And then they actually do this work across all 5 Gulf states. One of the most amazing stories from Gulf Corps is the woman in the center here with the red hair. Carrie Arnold. She came through the Gulf Corps program and then was eventually hired in our program. And she is now the conservation information manager on my team. So I work very closely with her, but she came through this program and has built her skills over time and is a wonderful person to work with. That being said, Gulf Corps, through these groups of crew members across each of the Gulf states, have had a tremendous impact in implementing restoration projects and nature-based solutions across the entire Gulf Coast. So you can see this image here from the monitoring that we do. This is pre-restoration at this location, 2018. With the work that the crews have undertaken at this site, post-restoration, you can see all of that vegetation. And if you take it back to my science experiment from middle school, which is actually a very common middle school experiment, I didn't invent that, you can see that the vegetation and the nature is holding it together and providing that benefit. And Gulf Corps has impacted over 40,000 acres across the Gulf Coast, so it's tremendously impactful. So what can you do? We're going to be breaking into some groups tonight to talk about different actions that you can take in your own communities. I listed a couple examples here as far as planting native plants because planting helps absorb carbon and can help with flood storage or flood benefits in some circumstances. Joining cleanups, so debris removal and garbage removal, all of those kind of litter impacts, they really impact the system's ability to provide the benefits. So even though picking up litter seems kind of like a very minor impact, it's truly not a minor impact. And every choice that you can take and an action you can take can make an impact in nature's ability to provide these benefits to us. And speaking up and staying engaged. So sharing when you do this work, talking in your community about the importance of the green spaces in your own communities, the importance of parks, and staying engaged. It seems like such a minor role to play, but it really is important in kind of changing the hearts and minds of folks about the role that nature can play in our own communities and across the world. And finally, I would just encourage you to stay curious about nature. The future really depends on us protecting nature, and people protect what they understand and what they love. So not losing our sense of curiosity that we're all born with and kind of keeping that going and encouraging your friends and family to stay curious about nature. Because ultimately, nature isn't something we need to save. Nature is something that saves us. And the future depends on people like you who see nature not just as something beautiful, but as something powerful. And if you're curious about nature, even if it's just a small science project or something you can do in your own community, that curiosity can grow into something much bigger. And I know it did for me. Thank you very much and happy Earth Day.